Atheists hope and think that people who believe in God like me are an endangered species. But I wonder if they realise that they too are an endangered species in the world that is emerging. Hi, I'm Warren, the rector here at St Columba's. Glad you could join me for my message of the day. There was a time not long ago that people generally had the language of faith somewhere in them. The assumptions of a Christian worldview. The worldview that just was taken for granted, the way you saw the world. So that when I started ordained ministry, I might have a baptism and we might have a church with a lot of visitors. And I might preach a sermon where the visitors would not be at sea with the language and the concepts that I would use. And they might disagree. They might be atheists. And we might have a conversation about that. But there was a common language, even in its rejection, a common worldview, even in its rejection. Not so much now. Now, it's not just that the language is absent in people, it's the very assumptions, the way that people see the world, what they take for granted without even thinking. That has changed. The assumptions that allow faith or atheism are disappearing. So for me, the cosmos is suffused with the glory of God. It's wired into a presence transcending this world, yet is intimately present. Now people don't look for transcendence, and they don't have the concepts and the language to believe or to refute, which means they don't have the background to come into faith in its fullest sense. It's not just that it's just not part of the worldview. Doesn't mean people can't come to faith, but it's just not part of the worldview. This is the changed situation. Now, churches are shifting into this new situation, this new context, but it's easy for churches to still live in the old world. I'll give a couple of examples. One is events of osmosis. This is more likely to be seen in the past in a traditional church where you got people of faith rubbing shoulders at some event with people who had stopped coming to church, for instance. And the idea was that by rubbing shoulders there would be a natural movement across the membrane that separated the two groups. But if you think about it, it still assumes a common way of seeing the world. It's almost like those who don't come to church anymore had just forgotten and they needed a reminder. Another example is the reduction of Christianity down to good works, to a church with a cause, to a social cause of some kind. The faith can't be reduced down to that. To do that, you've got to butcher it, cut it up into bits. And when churches and Christians do this, they open the door to people, the very people they're trying to reach out to say, well, actually, I don't need God to do that. And so in the very attempt to reach out, they opened the door to losing the assumptions, the background that enables faith to operate. So they're sort of like shooting themselves in the foot. And it's this is more likely to be seen in a kind of what I call the green left of the church. Another example would be those churches that emphasise believing something or other. You got to have it up here. You got to believe something, which is all fine, but it's sort of pretty close to giving people an overlay of belief, which they may well believe for a whole lot of reasons, but it's overlaid on top of a worldview that actually is inconsistent with the belief, a worldview that is being evacuated of God. It's not a long-term strategy, and you might find this strategy more in a Protestant church, perhaps. The key here is the assumptions that don't just make faith make sense, but the assumptions that are taken for granted by people that provide someone with a way of living in the world. It's how they automatically feel and understand their lives. That's the key here. It's not just a head knowledge here, say, or doing something. It's about how people inhabit the world, the assumptions behind who they are in the world. And the assumptions of faith, or unbelief for that matter, are disappearing. Now, these assumptions can't be maintained without prayer and worship. So you can do all the social events you want, all the social activism you want, all the teaching to give a certain knowledge that you want, but without worship, it will all fail. It's worship that connects people to a transcendent presence in a world loved by God. And it is worship that forms, that creates in us the background assumptions which make faith possible. As we worship and pray day after day, week after week, year after year, we are formed into a way of inhabiting the world that makes faith make sense, makes faith possible. And it's a way of living in the world that can be lived as a model, as a disciple of Jesus, but to show other people. Now, this is one reason why worship, and Sunday worship in particular, when the community of faith gathers together, is maintained in a church like St. Columba's. Worship and prayer is critical. A lot more that could be said about this, but I reckon that's enough for today. Thanks. Bye-bye.